Okay, thank you, Professor Mishra. It's always a pleasure to interact with people from University of Mumbai. Today, you have uh, the first inaugural lecture of this lecture series, Golden Year Alumni Network Lecture Series. Now, I recognize that I am not an alumni of physics department, but I do happen to be an alumni of Mumbai University. Uh, and as was mentioned, I have been connected with Mumbai University one way or the other. So it's always a great joy for me to be participating in a Mumbai University function. Dean Science and Technology, Professor Majumdar. Head Department of Physics, Professor Anuradha Mishra. Professor Rangawala, whom we just heard. And I'm sure there are several people, but I'm not in a position to recognize because I don't know who exactly is there and who is not. But my dear colleagues, all members of faculty, all students, and all those who have been connected with Mumbai University and who are in this program, my greetings to all of you. I have deliberately chosen to talk on this subject, the higher education, and this is of course has been important all along, but I think this is becoming more and more kind of course important, but also I would say urgent in the context of our existence in this competitive world, and more specifically in this competitive world which is being challenged by what is described as the tail end risks. The pandemic that we are going through is one such risk. The climate change threat that we all keep talking about is another such risk. And there is a whole range of things where the survival at different levels, particularly at the lower level for people, becomes a challenge. And while, of course, we all constitute a part of humanity, but in crisis, people behave in a rather strange way. And so, in a competitive world, which would be subjected to such extreme event scenarios, I think our own competence, our own capability, our own strengths are extremely important. And who will provide that strength to the nation? I think it is the knowledge institutions. And that's where universities do come in. Now, universities are, of course, important for sort of human resource development, as we call it. But, and that is certainly an important part of national development. But universities contribute to much more than that in economic terms, in industry capability term, in a variety of ways. And I want to come to that in a moment. And so, in fact, one can say the strength of the nation is actually determined by the institutions it holds, and more importantly, the knowledge institutions it holds. Now, in terms of uh, kind of nurturing great institutions, uh, we have done well, I would say, but we have miles to go. And so, in my slide, the beginning opening slide, you would of course recognize the Mumbai University emblem, the Rajabai Tower. On the other side, I have put Harvard, simply because in the academic ranking of world universities 2019, Harvard was adjudged to be number one. Now, who is number one, who is number two is not so material to me, because if you can pick up some other ranking and you will find a different outcome. So that is not terribly important. But what is important is, regardless of what scale, uh, regardless of what ranking system one might be following, what is important is that we must have a very large number of highly ranked institutions. And so I looked at in the same ranking, how many institutions do different countries have, or some of the countries have, in the top 500 global ranks. And one finds, particularly if you take this rank, and these numbers will vary depending on the ranking one chooses to see. But this particular one which I have chosen, US has 137 in the top 500 universities. China has 58 in top 500 universities. South Korea has 11 in top 500 universities. Even tiny Singapore has 2. And a large country like India has 1. That is Indian Institute of Science. Now, if you want to really leverage our knowledge institutions to take the national development forward, I think we must, what shall I say, take steps to be counted, both to be counted in the world and also to be counted in our own country in terms of various things related to national development. Could it be a piece of advice in a particular crisis situation? It could be a sort of gazing the crystal ball and say that what is going to happen in next decade, how the country should be preparing for. It could be identifying different strategic routes, call it for technology, call it for defense, call it for economy. But, it is the universities which has to give the wisdom to policymakers and help formulate the policy. And that is what will take the country forward. Now, I will leave this thought because this to me is the most important aspect of university contribution to national development. But in addition to the contribution in terms of human resources, I thought what kind of things can happen, I'll just narrate. And one example, this time example of Stanford University, and how it makes, or how a university can make a difference to the country. Stanford University has more than 2,100 award-winning faculty members, including 19 Nobel laureates and 2 field medalists. So that is the both the strength and more importantly the quality of the faculty. Going forward, the companies such as Google, Cisco, Yahoo, HP, Charles Schwab, eBay, Instagram, VMware, and Tesla, they all have Stanford roots. So you can see the contribution in the technology and the business world. According to a 2012 study, since the 1930s, Stanford entrepreneurs, both faculty as well as alumni, have started 39,900 companies, which in turn have created 5.4 million jobs and generated US dollar 2.7 trillion revenues annually. So imagine that a country like US, which has 137 universities in top 500, and if one university can make so much of contribution, no wonder United States is a superpower. It leads the world. Everything else, money, power, other things, all that comes secondary. It is these knowledge institutions that take them forward. And you know that US is always on the search for talent all over the world. And I'll come back to that towards the end of my lecture. So that is what I think we need to achieve, we need to move towards. We all have to work very hard to achieve that. So can we get the next slide, please? Can we have the next slide? Yeah. Now, in that context, in the specific Indian context, what are the key challenges, key education challenges? And of course, you can list a whole long list. But according to me, there are two fundamental challenges that we need to cope up. One is to make India globally competitive. We have, of course, a great demographic dividend, a lot of youth force in our country. But we need to capitalize on that and prepare our youth force to be effective in the new age society, because we are now transiting from industrial era to knowledge era, and that making our demographic dividend effective or contributing is, I think, an important challenge and objective of our education system. The second big challenge is about disparities. We have the rich-poor divides, we have the urban-rural divide, and so also we have the education divide. And so we must be able to create universal access to assured high-quality education, regardless of the economic strata one belongs to or regardless of the geographic location from where one comes to. And I think we need to mold our education to excel on both these fronts simultaneously. Now I want to give just an example, and in the table on this figure, you have a listing of the top items of import and also top items of export for a set of goods and products. In fact, these are the major items of export and major item of import. And you would find that except three elements, three items, which in the remarks column are highlighted by yellow, these are the success stories. Which are the success stories? Vehicles. And after a long time of our getting very attracted seeing an imported car running on Indian roads. Otherwise, they were all the standard 3 brands with the same shape for ages which were running one of the not very efficient vehicles. But that picture has changed. Today, Indian vehicles run also in foreign roads, as is reflected by the our export stands at around 14.5 billion. This is about a couple of years old story, but 14.5 billion US dollars, and we don't really import very much, hardly any. Similarly, pharmaceuticals, that's another success story, and we have great export of pharmaceutical in the country. And third is clothing. Now, and clearly, you can judge for yourself. This has not happened without doing R&D, but how much of that R&D has happened in our academic environment, and how much of that R&D has happened in industry itself, I would leave it for you to judge. Many times we curse industry, they don't come forward. But here are 3 success stories essentially created by industry. Of course, I think I'm not saying that the contribution of academia is insignificant, but I think our objective should be that almost all items on this table, it should be possible for us to put the remarks column in yellow, in the sense, turn the exports to be higher than import. And that is actually a reflection of our scientific capability, our ability to translate science capability into technology, and our ability to demonstrate that technology can compete in the world at large. And that, I think, is something should be, in our academia, we should take it as a challenge to turn the tables on this count, because that is what would mean making India globally competitive. Of course, there are many other measures, but I think a stark picture can be seen from what is there on this table. Talking about disparities, I think we have, India still a larger part, 2/3 of India still lives in villages as a whole. And the average per capita income in villages is half or less than half of average urban per capita income. Now, this has to change. And what can change that? It's only education. You must do capacity building of the people, youth, young people in rural areas, and make them competitive, make them compete with the rest of the world, make them compete with their urban counterparts, make them compete with their counterparts in other countries. And if you do that, you will reduce disparity, and also you will enhance the economic growth in the country many folds. Now, I think this is the first big challenge in education, and regardless of what we do, I think whether we are in the university or school or college, a college in the city, college in a village, wherever we are, I think this is a challenge we should be able to face head on. Now, can I have the next slide? Now, you want to do that, of course, we run education program, but just by education program, we of course make people aware of the knowledge that is available, but we must also help them, with the ability to leverage that knowledge. And that can happen in terms of some operating functions. How to run this, how to take this measurement, how to carry out this activity. that is not going to take us very far. It's important from livelihood of people, but it's not going to take us very far. Along with education, along with teaching, I think there must be an integral research component, as Professor Rangawala mentioned in his remarks. In fact, according to me, teaching and education have to go hand in hand. Without research, your teaching can never be up to the cutting edge. And without education, you will not get young people, good young people getting into research. And, there is a symbiotic relationship between the two, and all good institutions, they do these two things together. Even your ranking, whatever ranking you will find you always have these measures about research performance, and that is the important reason. Now, unfortunately, in terms of science technology indicators, publication record, or in terms of the impact factor of the publication, total number of publications, all that have gone up very significantly in India in last 7 or 10 years. And I think the rate of growth is remarkably fast. We are probably fastest growing country in that direction. But when it comes to leveraging that scientific research for national development, both in terms of making impact in the domain of knowledge, as well as in terms of making impact in terms of economy, then I think that is where we have miles to go. It's not that, of course, we have to increase our investment in R&D, but our investment is not all that small. And what you see in this figure is this circle, size of these circles is actually representative of the total R&D expenditure a country is making. And the location of this circle in this diagram, it actually shows on y-axis the scientists and engineers per million population in that country, and on the x-axis it is the R&D expenditure as a percentage of GDP. So using these coordinates, these circles are located appropriately in this figure. Now you would notice that India's circle, which is not very small, which is actually bigger than countries like Israel, Canada, Sweden, United Kingdom, Switzerland, Finland. So we are spending money more than these countries. And mind you, these countries are technologically fairly well advanced. In fact, we import a lot of technology products from them. If you ask a question whether are we able to export as much technology product to these countries, because if you are spending as much or more money, we should be able to do that, then you cannot give a satisfactory answer. So we have to make our R&D investment much more productive. Now you may say that, well, it's a large country, we have to cater to large number of people, so our investment is getting spread very thin, and so it's not being very effective. That is not true. The per full-time equivalent spending in India, it may not be the best, but it is reasonably comparable with many other countries. Our industry investments, of course, is low. I gave you 3 good examples. And of course, it has not happened without good industry investment there. But by and large, comparatively, most of the countries, the industry investment is actually more than public investment. We have to create that confidence, both industry in academia and academia in industry, to get greater investment. It is not going to come by a government order or some tax concession or something. This tax concession industry knows how to get over it. There are many industry R&Ds, and we know what is happening there. So I think we need to create this confidence building measures are required. So I think there is an urgent need to evolve and nurture conducive innovation ecosystem and respond to technology development demands of the country. It actually needs a mindset change, both on part of academia as well as on part of industry, across all domains: society, academia, research institutions, industry, bureaucracy, political people, public policy, and so on. But I think we need to change this ecosystem. And so, of course, what we can focus on is what we can do within the university. And of course, we should keep lobbying for rest of the stakeholders also to do their part. Can I have the next slide? Yeah. Now, I think this is a sequence, so you can probably uh, keep press stop. Yeah. Now, what you would have noticed in this sequence is, when we say research has many complexions. For example, you do research in quest for fundamental understanding. And of course, all of us in basic research, that is what is the objective. You also do research because, you want to develop technology. So you do research for consideration for use. In fact, people can earn money by doing research. The first kind which I mentioned, pure basic research, which is curiosity driven, pure voyage to discovery. This particular author from the book from which I have picked up this slide, it calls it the Bohr's quadrant, the research located in Bohr's quadrant. That's, immediately we get focus towards fundamental research. The other kind which I mentioned, the pure applied research, inventor driven to solve a practical problem, the author calls it Edison's quadrant, the research located in Edison's quadrant. And I'm sure you will immediately appreciate, because you're all familiar with these scientists, the kind of research they were doing. Edison created, through his research, something very practical. He gave us, well, the biggest example is incandescent light, but there are many others which have done. And so also Bohr, it's not that is the fundamental research has not given technologies, or it's not as if Edison's kind of or applied research work does not lead to basic contribution. It's not true. And that's where those two arrows, actually we should move both kind of research into the pasture quadrant, which is the user inspired basic research, the work that locates the center of research in an area of basic scientific ignorance that lies at the heart of a social problem. And the author calls it Pasture's quadrant. And again, you can correlate very easily because you know what kind of work Pasteur did. Now, I think if our maximum work is located in Pasture's quadrant, then you have the best, and you must create a research ecosystem, the technology ecosystem, the technology translation ecosystem, which will take you there. What is most important in this diagram is the last quadrant, which I have not talked about, which the diagram says science that goes nowhere. So end goals are other than curiosity or application. I must publish 5 papers for me to get promotion or fulfill a UGC requirement. Now, I think that research does not take you very far. And actually, the author suggests, he has put a big cross on that, that let us not even encourage that. And you would agree with me, most of our research is located there. And that's where we have this competitiveness issue. And I think we need to change this culture to a more competitive environment where we push the knowledge envelope, but also we do things which contributes to problem solving, which contributes to economic growth, which contributes to technology superiority, and so on. Can I have the next slide? Now, again, there are many dimensions to addressing that challenge. But one simple dimension which I thought I must mention, and I have in this diagram uh, put two parallels. On the left-hand side, uh, the sketch, in my view, depicts a typical university scene in India, by and large. There are exceptions, mind you. And on the right-hand side, a desirable scene in universities. And this one is a slide which has been picked up from the University of Tokyo, but many other universities have that. Now you would notice that bottom half part of both these pictures are more or less same. The universities abroad, even the best universities abroad, are no different than what we have in India, or at least some of the better universities in India. But what is missing by and large is the top half, which is actually focused on group research. The bottom half is focused on individual research. And mind you, if you want to get into a problem solving area, you can hardly solve a problem if you do not indulge in group research. Because problem doesn't detect, or this, if you are pursuing research in physics, there could be a research problem in physics. But even that problem, you want to address find an answer to that, particularly through experimental means, you would have to resort to technologies where you will have to go to areas beyond physics. And you've seen all big physics experiments. They are all technology marvels. And unless and until they are able to handle those technologies, you can never do that physics. So the point I'm making is that you want to excel, just as individual research is important, so also group research is very important. You must take a real life problem and solve it and bring to bear all disciplines that are necessary to solve that problem. And in so doing, the skill sets that you require or the knowledge that you need to be equipped with, they are not identical. When you do individual research, and they're all listed there on that slide, you have a set of knowledge attributes or skill sets. And for group, you have another set of knowledge attributes and skill sets. And I think in a university environment, we need to focus on both. As long as we don't do that, I think it will be very difficult to be counted among the world-class universities, regardless of whatever other things you might do. Along with that, you have to also, there is a bar on the right-hand side called the education sharing between industry and university. And there has to be sharing. It may, at the individual level, there may be larger university contribution and lesser industry contribution. And at the higher end of group research, there could be larger industry contribution and lesser individual contribution. But that sharing has to be there all along. In our Indian scene, by and large, there is hardly any education sharing with industry. Most of it is university. And this is what needs to change. So we need a holistic learning environment and an ecosystem in our universities. So this is one thing, and this is certainly well within the university domain. The faculty members and the university authorities together can actually achieve this. And I can assure you, industry will come running moment they are sure that whatever money they invest will be put to good use. Because there is a huge hunger for knowledge contribution in anything that industry is doing today, and because this is required for them to be competitive. Can we move to the next slide? Another aspect that we need to focus on, and that also is something that we need to do within our own environment, university or academic environment, is, according to me, I find this uh, kind of segregation, fundamental research and applied research, very artificial. And, I come from applied domain, mechanical engineering is what I did. And when I became director BARC, this discussion has been going on, engineer versus scientist or one the other. So I had to, in one of the public meeting, I had to, in fact, openly say that I am a nut bolt engineer and I am proud of being one. Not that I fully understand the importance of fundamental science, and without that things cannot go on. But this separation, I think, is what is creating serious damage. It's almost I think a derivative of the Varnashram mindset that we have in our society, and I think we should eliminate that. According to me, there is, in fact, and that's why I have put this slide here. This slide, the three figures at the bottom, they are essentially transportation sector. On the bottom right-hand side is the typical bullet train, which can go up to maybe 400, 500 kilometers per hour. And on the bottom left-hand side is a maglev, train which, levitates as a result of magnetic field. And then there is no friction, so you can have a very efficient transport. And people have made these running up to 300 kilometers or so. A figure in between is a flying car. Now, I have juxtaposed this along with fundamental research and applied research. And the point I want to pose is, let's say there is an applied research lab dedicated to railway transportation. In such a lab, I may make incremental progresses, evolution, technology may evolve, and I may take for example, the kind of trains we have, I may be able to take it to the level of bullet train, because these are all incremental evolutions. No new physics is involved. It's the same engineering, and I keep on refining that further and further and improve the performance. Very important. But if you ask a question in such an environment, could I have a maglev? And you will find that answer is no. Because, of course, electric traction does involve electromagnetics. But maglev involves a much different or much deeper understanding in electromagnetics. And there is every chance that a physics lab dedicated to fundamental research, which understands electromagnetics at its fundamentals, can have some out-of-box ideas for transportation, electric transportation. And so my point is, if you want disruptive technologies to emerge, there is a higher chance of those emerging in fundamental research environment than the chance of their emerging on dedicated applied research environment. But having said that, we cannot be taking the attitude that, well, I am doing fundamental research, so it's not my job to take it to application. Because then I can show some nice levitation in the lab, maybe make children very happy, but can't go very further. And there is a classic example. For example, when high temperature superconductivity came on scene, there was fervent activity in high TC research in our country. There was a dedicated funding. Everybody took that funding, lot of research, lot of publications. Where are we in high temperature superconducting technology in our country? And that is because in spite of all that understanding in basic science, understanding of that physics, we haven't bothered to take that forward. Now, I'm not saying for a moment that those who have invented this must take that forward by themselves. If they want to, I think that's wonderful. But if they don't, then we must have an atmosphere where we must be able to start a relay race. They hand over the baton to somebody else who can build the technology on that, remain connected to guide them, and they can hand over to some other group of engineers who can take it even further. That is what is missing. A university which has departments in all disciplines. And mind you, and this I'm not talking about only science and technology, even disciplines like economics, humanities, they all play a very important role in these technologies. Provided we have this connectedness, we have this search for problems where interdisciplinary knowledge can be brought to bear. And let me come to the middle figure, the flying car. These are all the three figures we kind of were discussing when I was doing the Technology Vision 2035 document. And at that time, flying car was just a utopian idea, like something which is there in the mind. But you would be surprised today if you go to internet, you will actually find models. People have made prototypes, proof of concepts of start a car from their garage, go to a nearest airstrip on the public road, and on the airstrip take off, land to the destination, airstrip at the destination, again fold back, take a public road and go to the place of your work or whatever, wherever you want to go. This has come into reality. Now, this requires a particular kind of ecosystem, particular way of nurturing innovative ideas and take them to logical conclusion. And that is what I think we need to nurture. And in so doing, I think the value system that we pursue is very important. And you have seen, university values requires us that everybody should be PhD. So those who are not PhD, there is a mad rush to do PhD. University requires us to have so much of publication, so there is a mad rush for getting those publication counted. Such kind of bin counting hardly helps. I think the value system should be that we should make impact in all those domains which are consistent with the objective of the institution in which we are working. We are in academic institution, so research is important, teaching is important. So there must be measure of my teaching contribution, impact on student, 360-degree feedback from student and other members. In terms of my research contribution of value of my papers, not bin counting number of papers, but the peer judgment, because that impact has to be judged on the right stakeholders. In case of teaching, the stakeholders, prime stakeholder are students. In case of research, the prime stakeholders are peer group and not counting the papers. And similarly, if I'm doing applied research, I must have a downstream partner who would make use of data I generate or applied work that I do to carry that research or that technology forward. And in terms of if I'm doing something that solves the problem in the society or gives a technology or a product to industry, then I must measure the impact on society or the profitability in industry, turnover in terms of the output or growth in economy. And I think our value systems must reflect these measures of performance. And it's only then, because if you don't have them, then I will have only, University has asked me to show that. So if there is some buzzword, every presentation I'll use that buzzword. Now that doesn't take the country very far. And so this value system is extremely important. Can we go to the next slide, please? Next slide. Yes. Now, carrying on with the ecosystem, see, Indians in foreign countries, they have made a lot of impact. We all know that. We always say that, well, we never knew that so-and-so is such a competent fellow or such a bright fellow, but he went to US and he has done wonders. Now, has the individual student changed, or because he's in a different environment that has made that difference? And that's an important question to address. For example, this table that you are seeing, this actually was done by a think tank in the US when there was this issue about the HB1 visa for immigrants. So a question was raised as to the immigrants to US and the billion-dollar startups which have been created by these immigrants. And that study kind of compiled this table, which is the country from where the immigrants have come and the number of entrepreneurs who have created a billion-dollar startup. And you will find India is on top of that table. I am very proud of this. Recognize that these are students who have come from our universities, our colleges. Now, if the Indians in America can create $14 billion companies, the Indians in India should be able to create at least 100 times or 1,000 times as much, because that is the number, provided we have the right ecosystem. So now this, a good part of it is outside, beyond the university environment, but university environment has a huge role to play in this, because unless that is right, rest of it will not matter. And that's where that large number of top universities in the country is extremely important. Now, why it is important? It's important because this innovation translation is, next slide, please. Can I get the next slide? Yes, the innovation translation is full of pitfalls, or more than pitfalls, as the slide heading is, valleys of death. And by the way, valleys of death is very extensively discussed in management books. So you can get hold of some of these books. And in this figure, it shows the valleys of death when you are translating an idea to prototype, prototype to manufacture, and manufacture to real life use. And you would notice the way it has been depicted. The research translation, idea to prototype, there is a valley, but not so big. But prototype to manufacture is even bigger. And manufacturing to real life is also something significant. So the innovation ecosystem that I was talking about, unless there is a sound partnership between government, academia, and industry, you are not going to have this. And that is what I think we should aim at. So it's nice now that you have in our Mumbai University also an incubation center, and you have to create that culture. And I showed you in the first slide what kind of big things have happened in Stanford or MITs or even Harvard and things like that. Now, India also, it is beginning to happen. For example, if you look at IIT Madras, there is a huge research park. And if one of you happens to be in Chennai, I would encourage you to visit that place. But unfortunately, that's only one like that in our country. There are a few in the making, but if you go to China, there are maybe 500 like that. If you go to other countries, maybe there are 100, 200 like that. And unless you create that environment, and these have to be triggered by university, because everything you have to inculcate that habit, and that can happen only in the university, and that is something. So we have made a beginning, but I think we should take it to its logical end. Now, so far I was talking about innovation in general. Next slide, please. I also mentioned that we have, for example, a larger part of our population living in villages. Now, where do the village young people or students, if they have to go to higher education, where they have to go? They have to come to a city. Moment they come to city, they get cut off from their village environment, village needs, technology which will make a difference to village. So it is my firm belief that we need a new ecosystem in villages, a new ecosystem which I would call the new age society habitat. It could be, and it could be a new age society habitat of the smallest size, such a village which has characteristics of city, such a village where the children can also build apps the way city students build, such a village where children can also create a startup, for that matter, running a drone for agriculture purposes, such a village where children can develop a new process leveraging agriculture produce. For example, uh, you can produce drop-in fuel using waste agriculture. And these technologies are there, and Bangalore Shell has set up a plant like that. Can we have such even innovation taking place in our villages? If you are able to create such an ecosystem, then I think in this new knowledge era, in a village, you can contribute to agriculture, you can contribute to manufacturing, because decentralized manufacturing, 3D printing can take place anywhere. And you can, of course, contribute to service sector, because knowledge technologies anyway are decentralized and democratized. In the city, on the other hand, you can do the service sector part and the industry sector part. You can do only a bit, but not very much in the context of agriculture. So theoretically, there is larger opportunity for children in villages. But the way we have built our environment and the framework, there is zero opportunity in villages. And we have created this huge disparity. And then these people come to city, work under bad conditions. When there is pandemic, industry is closed, all these daily wage workers have to rush, and then they walk under distress for thousands of kilometers. I think it is a complete failure of the way we have built our systems, and we need to change that. You want to change that, you want to begin with villages by converting a village into silage, an ecosystem that characterizes smallest human settlement in digital society of 21st century, digital city in a modern village. I won't go into detail of that, but we have agriculture. You have NSS program in all universities. Our students go to villages, they get familiar, they do some good things. Can we channelize that energy? And can we, for example, Bombay University has campuses. You have the entire coastline with you, and most of the area is rural area. You have campuses there, you have colleges there, and you have NSS there. So can you do something in terms of academics as well as in terms of engagement with rural people, and make that transformation happen. If you begin there, I think several things will happen. We hear Konkan to California. It's not going to happen just like that. California is a high-tech place. It, of course, has a good vineyard and good Konkan features, but it has also a huge technology. And Bombay University, in its jurisdiction, has that kind of an area. And people have been talking about Konkan to California. I would suggest all of you to take this challenge and translate Konkan to California and make Bombay University into, call it Stanford, because Stanford is in California, or any one of those universities which is within top 500 globally. With this, I come to the last slide. Last slide, please. And that is only to say that you must move towards an enlightened society. And that enlightened society is a three-legged stool: knowledge, society, and economy. And if any one of these legs is missing or broken, you cannot have an enlightened society. Now, it's very easy that society and economy you all want to preserve, because human beings have to survive. So we have to earn money, and we have to do, human beings cannot live as isolation. You have to work together. So society and economy usually remains in reasonable shape. It is the casualty is knowledge. Somehow knowledge we have put on a high pedestal, quite apart from this triad of knowledge, society, and economy. And then it has very little to do with society. It has very little to do with society. If there is some Mahatma, I will go listen to a lecture and feel very elated. Next day, when I have to go to work, I'll forget all that and get back to business as usual. If one day I had done some terrible sins, evening I'll go to a temple and wash my sins, say my prayers, and be happy. I think we need to take our knowledge engagement deeper than that. Our knowledge has to engage with economy. Our knowledge has to engage with society. And so as we take knowledge forward, as we take science forward, can translate that to technology and societal benefit, this triad has to remain healthy, because it's only then that the relationship between society and economy, which is actually otherwise transactional, trade relationship is all transactional. That doesn't take you very far. But if you have this healthy triad, then you actually inculcate better values. And when that happens, this relationship, rather than becoming or remaining transactional, it actually moves towards new creation, entrepreneurship, new technology, and things like that. And that is what gives you joy. That is what actually gives you greater degree of wisdom. And so if you want to, and that's what is human resource, we say university's job is human resource. That one, I think we must be able to move towards an enlightened society. And if you want to move towards enlightened society, in my view, you cannot do that unless this triad of knowledge, society, and economy remains healthy. So I think that's the final message that I want to leave with all of you on this day when you are beginning this lecture series, Gyan lecture series. And I wish all the alumni who are in this gathering to think about this, because Bombay University, you are also living in the world, outer world there. Some of you may be abroad. So you can compare this Indian industry situation, Indian society situation, industry situation abroad, society situation abroad, university situation, and contribute something to your alma mater through your actual experience, through actually what you are seeing. And but I think one thing should remain uncompromised, and that is to take Mumbai University 2 within 500 ranks globally. Thank you very much.
Very, very much, sir. It was a wonderful exposition, which we were all very eagerly listening to. And it reminded me of the stories which we hear from mythology, where for King Janaka's court, it is said that in one day you spend in the court, you will learn 20 years worth of Dharma Shastra. It was similar experience for us, that we got such a
My goodness.
bird's eye view of the whole education, society, and economy, and how this works together. Thank you so much, sir. It was a
Thank
really
you.
wonderful experience. There are a few questions. Uh, I would first call upon Dr. Radha Srinivasan, I believe it is, who has raised her hand. Ma'am, you can unmute and you can ask your question, please.
Hello, sir. Yeah.
Hello,
So
how are you?
yeah, sir, I'm fine. Sir, I just mentioned you talk about the social engagement for betterment. So we did do this, and you sir, also mentioned that it should get more channelized. So I was just trying to understand how, since you have interacted with the department, how well could we take this forward? Because we used to do it in the colleges. I believe you are aware of that. And so, we need to focus more the department to reaching, as you said, Konkan and then California, or even, en route, we even go to Dubai and so on. So that was my question, how we could channelize our activities.
Well, simple things like, for example, now, you can, let's say, you look at the problems that we have in areas around. Now, the simple issue is even waste management is a serious issue. Now, waste management can be handled in a variety of techniques, but many of them are in fact physics oriented. For example, Institute of Plasma Research has made a plasma incinerator, or you could also think of, for example, you have the Nanoscience, Nanotechnology Center. In physics departments, you may have some expert. You can actually build a set of sensors, and some of these sensors can be made, after all, they are all, of course, sensors are made on a variety of principles, but the simple thing is you can simply silicon chip doped differently can become sensor for a variety of things. And it can be a sensor for looking at pollutants, looking at waste in air, and so on and so forth. Now, I think it should be quite possible to begin with carrying out a survey of technologies which are employed. While doing that, if the students or faculty members get some ideas, that could become a research project. Of course, when you say research project, it has to go through all the tests, those valleys of death are there also. But we must participate and take it through, negotiate these valleys. And then after developing such products, actually deploy in the field. Now, everything cannot happen on day one. It has to begin small. It can begin with collection of data. It can begin with compiling the and also, when it comes to, that's why I took the example of NSAs. When it comes to solving the problem, you don't have to restrict yourself as Department of Physics. Why can't Department of Physics, Department of Chemistry, and Department of Biology join hands together? And then you'll find many more things can be done. I gave you example of energy. For example, today there is a huge energy potential by surplus agriculture residue, by processing that, or other biomass which has no other use. And these are all big challenges which are going on. Even in India, a lot of work is going on. I think university can take some of these things. I'll tell you one example and I'll stop reply to this. We have some activity going on in Nandurbar district, in the tribal areas of Nandurbar district, as a part of this silage activity. It is being done by the North Maharashtra University, Kaviyatri Bahanabai Chaudhary, North Maharashtra University. Professor J.B. Joshi, whom I'm sure all of you know, who was the director of Institute of Chemical Technology, he is also the Homi Bhabha Chair Professor at HBNI, Homi Bhabha National Institute. And he is also the president of Marathi Vigyan Parishad. And he takes a lot of interest in silage. So he actually took his PhD students, a significant number, I think 10, 15 of his PhD students, and they went on a tour, village by village in Nandurbar Taluk. So they used to stay overnight in villages, talk to villagers, understand their problem. And he has identified a number of R&D problems, which some of his students would do. Some of them are also scattered in other places. And I believe he is in touch with Mumbai University faculty, whether Mumbai University would like to join such effort. Now, Nandurbar belongs to a different geographical domain, but you can do similar thing within the geographical domain of Mumbai University. What prevents you from doing so? So I think there are many ways of doing this, but you have to think and persevere to do this. You can't do big things on day one. It will have to begin small.
Thank you very much, sir, for a very detailed reply. I would now call upon Dr. Ajit Kumar has a question. Sir, you can unmute and speak, sir, please.
Good evening to everybody. First of all, thank you very much, sir, for your very nice and thoughtful lecture. And my question is, like you mentioned that between the industry and institutes, I mean universities, there are hardly any interaction. So, and now we just heard that the government has approved the new education policy today. So, do you think that this new education policy can significantly have, let us say, or improve the interaction between the industry and university? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. That's an important question. And I think the answer to your question is yes. In fact, even now, for example, central government has mandated IITs to adopt 10 villages and carry out interventions in those villages using their knowledge. Similarly, they have mandated NITs to adopt 5 villages each. And also, IITs also 10 villages each IIT to adopt 10 villages. So NITs to adopt 5 villages each. And also, I think some of the central universities have been mandated. I think we could also mandate our universities in Maharashtra to do likewise. And mind you, this has started happening even before adoption of the new education policy. New education policy, I know, has placed a lot of emphasis on innovation. And innovation cannot happen unless there is an engagement between people with complementary capabilities. Because, identical capabilities, you will all think alike, then you cannot solve a real life problem. You want to solve a real life problem, you want people with diverse capabilities, and there must be a good engagement among them. And that's where that multidisciplinarity comes in. So, and this is all stated. And of course, how to take it forward, I also believe that you cannot have to everybody. That doesn't work. You have to from outside that if somebody mandates us to do so, we'll do that. You can do things yourself. What has been mandated is engage with industry. What has been is engage in multidisciplinary. For example, even if it comes to teaching, I think wherever there is an opportunity, even in, for example, in physics, you must be having some coverage on instrumentation. And when it comes to instrumentation, I think it's always appropriate to find out somebody from industry, particularly instrumentation industry, where, of course, the individual should have the right credentials. So you must have a PhD. So this person also should have a PhD. And so all those credentials, and it has to go through your statutory bodies for approval and all. But I think we should have industry colleague to take, for example, half of such a course, instrumentation course, and not just take a course, give lectures and go away, but also evaluate and give marks. And if that engagement is there, slowly that will create confidence, and more challenges will be thrown to students and staff and the laboratories where you can do industry relevant. You have to, create confidence building measures to change that ecosystem. And I think these things take time. Again, as I said in response to earlier question, if you say that, well, I'll start doing big from day one, it doesn't work. You have to begin small and progressively move it forward.
Thank you very much, sir. Dr. Sunil Vanchu has a question. You may unmute and ask your question, sir. Please go ahead. You are on mute, Dr. Vanchu. So, yeah.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Yes.
Thank you very much, sir. It was an enlightening session for all of us. And it's always a treat to listen to your ideas. Half of my question is already done, sir. I'll ask the other half, which is left. Would you agree that the bigger problem is schools rather than universities? Because universities depend on the input which comes from the schooling system, and the children that come to the university are actually, not really trained the way they should be, so that they can take up challenges which you just were mentioning when it comes to innovation or taking risk or having the ethical parameters. It is a dilemma in the sense that teachers are judged when it comes to their promotions and such avenues. They are judged on the basis of parameters which actually don't allow them freedom to get into, let's say, village domain and pick up these adopt villages, because there was a scheme from the government of India which came to our university as well, but we could not do much because nobody was willing to go to a village because it was not going to fetch him a promotion. He needs those papers, those numbers. So how do we really, solve these problems?
I think these are very important issues. And talking about school education first, I think we need to tackle skills to carry out operational activities. I think all of them, in my view, are equally important. So I would not wait. While one must make full efforts to make sure that we deal with this in a comprehensive way and look at all dimensions together, that comprehensive approach is extremely important. But at the same time, to me, it is unthinkable that everything will work in phase. there will be always, things change. Today also, if you see compared to 10 years back or 20 years back, several things have changed for the better. But to imagine that everything will be synchronized is probably unrealistic. And so this challenge which you mentioned will always be there. And so there will always be the so-called pioneers who show the way. When you chart or when you negotiate an uncharted territory, you always have this problem. But while again, as I said, while we should remain conscious, work for making those changes, that does not mean that we should hold ourselves back. A classic example is what is happening today in the context of school education. For example, classroom teaching is the traditional way of our school education. Now, because of this pandemic, unfortunately, there are limitations on that. And then so everybody said now online education. And then they realized that online education, so far we have been telling children not to hold mobile in their hand. And now we want them to have online education using a mobile. And then there is a bigger question, how many children have smartphones? And then how can it be if you do online education only for rich people? What about those who cannot afford smartphone? So, and then this idea of television came in. And so there is a whole kind of argument, this, that. Now, I don't understand this. There will be always, we should simply go ahead and make sure that all the other limitations are there. We have to actions and correct for them as we go along. And so it is this spirit, for example, MKCL, and I'm noticing Dr. Pradhan somewhere in the audience. You must be aware that since you talked about school education, see, our children are losing days and weeks and now months of their schooling. So MKCL decided to go ahead with this television serial, Tilimili, in Marathi. And it's just a half an hour every day for each of the class from first standard to 8th standard. And now, not that it will do everything, but it will probably reach the largest number of students possible. Now, if along with that, one takes over, for example, an engagement between the school teachers and these children in terms of, further mentoring, further evaluation, and several other engagements, which can be done without having the whole class in the classroom simultaneously. We can do some kind of time sharing, space sharing, and if that is done, we can make it more. But I think the mindset of people is more on apps and this like that and all. Now, how many people can afford apps? So now, not that the apps are good. Those who can do, they benefit. So I think it's okay. So, but we must move forward and not bother about, I have this problem, I have that problem. That's my point.
Thank you very much, sir. There are a couple of more questions. Dr. Vaibhav Raut has the next question. You can unmute and ask your question, sir. Hello, Vaibhav. We can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, now we are able
I can.
to hear. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for a wonderful talk. My question is that you emphasized about increasing engagement of universities with industries and startups. So do our universities' basic curriculum need a significant change in terms of more application-based experimental facilities and projects linked to industries or startups? Also, how students and faculties can develop this aspect. It has been seen that viewpoints of society by large and peers significantly affect the mindsets where we tend to stick to our usual curriculums in the universities. And one more supplement question I have regarding the Chinese progress towards developing and cultivating the universities as compared to the universities where the basic demographies and populations remain equal, and how we can actually get some sense from them.
Let me address the Chinese one first, and then I'll come back to the other question. I think China has done tremendous thing in the field of education all across, from school to university. First of all, China, the university education is all campus based. There are no affiliated colleges. Only for licentiate courses and such other courses there are colleges, but regular university education, everything is campus based. And they have created huge universities with 20,000 students on the campus, 40,000 students on the campus, and the like. That is one. In one of my interaction with a president of Chinese, one of the Chinese university, I actually asked him that, well, look, that is the time when they had carried out huge expansion at the big universities and big campuses and all. And there was criticism in the media that the quality of science research in Chinese university is very poor. And so I asked this question that, you have done so well in terms of building this education framework, and but we also hear this issue of quality. So tell us, what is your kind of objective in terms of going forward, and in the overall sense, how do you position the university system? And you would find that that answer actually sent shivers down my spine, and I'll tell you what he said. He said, first off, I agree that we had to expand our system to accommodate, to make sure that we are able to leverage the huge human talent force that we have. So we emphasized quantity, and we were conscious that quality is suffering in the process. Now we are going to emphasize on quality and make sure that we compete with the best. And then he says that, mind you, this is about 10 years ago, not today, 10 years back. And then he said that, he says our economy is growing, and very soon we will become leaders. And then he says, not leaders just in terms of economy, but in every respect. And when China becomes the world leader, we will require people to lead not just China, but the world. And that is the ambition of a university president. So you can gauge what kind of ambitions China is pursuing. And mind you, by and large, in terms of quality, they have achieved what they said. So there are similar examples in terms of school education and all. I won't drag on for want of time. And what was your first question?
Vaibhav?
Okay, so my first question was, sir, it's more about our university's basic educational curriculum. Do it need a significant change in terms of application-based experimental facilities and project linked to industry and startups? I mean, we are more engaged towards, the education has more and less emphasis on an experimental aspect where we get more sense of a physical concept especially we are trying to understand any
okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Well, in principle, curriculum is something which, according to me, should remain a dynamic phenomenon. There is nothing like a static curriculum. If some course has not changed for 10 years or 5 years, there is something wrong. And so, but as the things evolve, we should keep changing the curriculum. And there is a process in the university, or Mumbai University also has that process. So only thing is how comprehensively we are adopting or deploying that process. But education curriculum has to evolve. The more important thing to me is this bringing in this togetherness and comprehensiveness. You know, this class distinctions. This is basic, this is applied. I should have 50% basic, 50% applied. This kind of things, according to me, are terrible. I think it should be in the context of developing as perfect an understanding in terms of whatever is there around us or whatever disciplines are supposed to be covered, and also exposure to potential applications in as comprehensive a way as possible to whatever knowledge you are imparting, and actually see how can you do this. I must tell you a case in Japan, and I'm sure many of you would have seen, all of you have traveled abroad. This was a case of a simple friction. I'm not talking about any advance, but so this was a small science museum for children. And this was a pavilion which was only on friction. So it had experiments the way we have in physics lab, the inclined slope and the rolling friction demonstration and so on and so forth. Then it went on to, in terms of various machineries and locomotives and, wherever friction is involved, all that exposure. And finally, it was a virtual cycle tour where children had to get on a cycle, in fact, competitive. So 2 of them. And in front of them on the screen, virtually a path was shown where there was a hill and downslope and rough terrain and smooth terrain and all kinds of things. And there was a tactile feedback bringing to the pedal, where children had to pedal to feel that if they are going up, they have to apply more force. If it is smooth, it becomes very, if it is down this slope, they have to apply brakes. All that was realistic, and children were enjoying fun, and there were messages coming on different aspects of friction. Now, look at in terms of the conceptual clarity these children will develop in a matter of friction compared to conceptual clarity we are able to develop. And this is where that engagement comes in. Now, this was possible because all that industry had helped them to do so. The university by themselves could not do it, in the science center by themselves could not do it, but together they have done this. This is the kind of ecosystem that I think one should help create. It's not going to happen again. I'm emphasizing that point. If I go to industry and say, I want this, do that, they'll say, what will happen? What is the use? What is the output? So you have to create an atmosphere, and this doesn't happen overnight, as I said earlier.